We are in the midst of another election cycle here in America, and as always, the world is, for better or worse, tuned in. Our political discourse is unfolding in every corner of the online world, where it can find a foothold and spread. Unfortunately, American conversations often dominate the global stage, overshadowing other critical issues worldwide. The weight of what's at stake here is abundantly clear though, especially as so many question what it will mean if things don't go the way we hope. This anxiety isn't just about one election. It reflects a broader concern about the rise of authoritarianism that is creeping into many other countries. As we navigate this crucial moment, it's more important than ever to recognize the far-reaching implications of our choices. I'm fully aware that I exist in echo chambers. The people I tend to interact with are usually very politically involved, the kind of people that share their thoughts on what's happening in the world. But lately, I've noticed something. More and more people are talking about disengaging from the system altogether. The reasons vary. Some feel disillusioned with politics as a whole. Others are frustrated by the lack of meaningful engagement from certain candidates and lawmakers. And many are simply disappointed by the slow pace of change they are hoping to see. Let me be clear. I'm not hiding where I stand politically. I believe in fundamental human rights, and I believe that everyone should be able to live free from oppression. In America, that leaves me with one of two choices. Personally, knowing we operate within that binary system, I vote as a Democrat. I have been brought into the dark-sided leftist ideology pushed forward by the likes of Hassan and AOC, but the system exists, and I grew up too brown and too poor to not vote. After a wild turn of events this summer, Kamala Harris took that Democratic ticket just days after Trump survived an assassination attempt. If that doesn't show you how fucked things are right now, I'm not sure what will. Harris is far from a perfect candidate. When she ran in 2020, there were plenty of valid critiques, particularly about her tenure as Attorney General in California before she became a senator for the state. These concerns haven't faded. Critics often highlight her history as a prosecutor, her ties to law enforcement, and the broader systemic violence against Black people and people of color, both in the US and globally, as reasons to disengage from supporting her. This year, perhaps now more than ever, we're realizing that the choices we make, or fail to make, can have significant consequences both at home and abroad. The ongoing atrocities, coupled with our country's history of injustice, have left many disillusioned and weary of a system that often seems to perpetuate harm and push people further into hardship. These feelings are valid, but this conversation isn't about stepping away from these complaints. Instead, I want to focus on this growing feeling of apathy. When we choose not to participate, we inadvertently contribute to the very problems we're trying so hard to solve. This isn't just about fulfilling a civic duty. It's about recognizing the harm that comes from inaction and the missed opportunities to push for real change. Jean-Jacques Rousseau's concept of the social contract redefined how we think about society and government. He argued that legitimate political authority stems from the consent of the governed, not the power of rulers. As he said, the people, being subject to the laws, ought to be their author. Simple enough. This idea is crucial as it frames our understanding of freedom not as isolation, but as a collective commitment to the common good. Disengagement from this process isn't just a personal choice, it's a failure with real-world consequences. Civic engagement isn't just a choice, it's a fundamental responsibility that upholds the social contract binding us together. Lately, what really gets under my skin is the hypocrisy of those who loudly advocate for human rights, whether it's the plight of Palestinians, the systemic violence against Black and other POC, or the continued marginalization of vulnerable communities, yet in the same breath, declare they might not vote because they're disillusioned with the system. Disengagement, disguised as protest, doesn't change the system, it strengthens it, by allowing the status quo to persist unchallenged. If we truly care about these issues, then working within the system to drive change is not just necessary, it's our duty. As Rousseau once said, man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. Ignoring how oppression seeps into every aspect of our lives speaks more to our own privilege than our freedom. While we might feel detached from the hardship around us, There are countless in this country desperate for change. We must remember that the illusion of freedom does not absolve us from the reality of being entangled in systems of oppression. Our engagement, or lack thereof, has real consequences for those who can't afford to look away. The social contract isn't just about theory. It's about recognizing our collective duty and personal responsibility in upholding the principles that bind us together as a society. So, what role do we all play in this? How does our participation, or lack thereof, impact the very things we seek to protect? Before we dive into the social contract, it's crucial to understand the man behind this idea, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Rousseau was an 18th century philosopher, writer, and thinker. Born into a chaotic situation in Geneva, he lost his mother shortly after birth, and his father abandoned him while he was still young. Rousseau didn't climb the ranks through elite schools. Instead, he was largely self-taught, learning from books and the streets as he drifted through Switzerland and France. Scraping by on odd jobs, he never quite fit in, but when he finally landed in Paris, he shook the intellectual world with sharp words and cutting essays. Even after gaining fame, Rousseau stayed true to his roots, always remaining a bit of an outsider. It was this outsider perspective that allowed him to critique society so sharply. He didn't just accept things as they were. He questioned, dissected, and reimagined them. When we talk about Rousseau and his concept of the social contract, we are not just talking about abstract philosophy. We're talking about a vision for society that's grounded in real-world concerns. A vision that pushes us to think about our own role in shaping the world we live in. The social contract is a concept that's fundamental not just to political philosophy, but to how we understand our roles in society today. Imagine a simple state of nature. No laws, no government, just people doing whatever they want, whenever they want. It sounds like total freedom at first, but without any structure, things quickly become messy. There's no security, no guaranteed rights, and the strong can easily overpower the weak. Rousseau recognized this problem and proposed that in order to live peacefully and prosperously together, we needed to make a collective agreement, what he called the social contract. This isn't something we sign or declare in front of some guy in an office, obviously, but rather an implicit agreement we all enter into as members of a society. Essentially, we agree to give up a certain degree of personal freedom, like the freedom to do absolutely anything, and I mean anything, we want, in exchange for the benefits of living under a system of laws and government that serves the common good. Let's consider the concept of the social contract from a practical standpoint. It's not about surrendering freedom to authority. It's about everyone having a role in shaping the rules we live by. Without some form of agreement, society can quickly become chaotic. Rousseau understood this, stating, "The people, being subject to the laws, ought to be their author." Meaning, if we're governed by laws, we should be involved in creating them. The social contract isn't about control, it's about mutual cooperation. It helps maintain order and protect individual rights, preventing society from descending into disorder. The social contract is foundational to a stable society. Without it, we lose essential benefits like safety, education, and the ability to influence the rules that govern us. It's not a restriction, but a necessary framework that allows us to coexist peacefully, or at least try to, ensuring that personal freedoms are balanced with collective responsibility. That brings us to one of Rousseau's most intriguing ideas, the distinction between the general will and the will of all. It's a concept that might sound a bit abstract at first, but once you get it, it really shifts how you think about society and your role within it. The will of all is just what it sounds like. It's the sum of everyone's individual wants, needs, and desires. As Rousseau himself put it, to renounce liberty is to renounce being a man, to surrender the rights of humanity and even its duties. Such a renunciation is incompatible with man's nature. This idea emphasizes that being human means having the freedom to experience the world in all the ways we choose. our freedom allows us to live life on our own terms, enjoying what we want when we want it. People's desires are shaped by their backgrounds, be it religion, race, class, or personal experiences, and these differences can lead to a collection of selfish interests that often miss the bigger picture. The will of all can easily become a reflection of individual desires that don't always align with what's best for everyone. What I want might not be what my neighbor wants, or what the person at the grocery store wants, or even what that dude at the gym wants. We all have different preferences, but what ties us together is our shared humanity. Rousseau's concept of the general will goes far beyond individual desires. It's about what's best for society as a whole. The general will embodies the common good, the shared interests that unite us as a community or as a society. According to Rousseau, true freedom isn't just about pursuing our personal ambitions. It's about coming together to shape a future that benefits everyone, bringing us closer to a harmonious and fulfilling life. I know a lot of you are probably rolling your eyes hearing that. It feels too fluffy, too hopeful, too dreamy. But I think as we're moving ahead in humanity's future, that's definitely the future a lot of us would like to be seen. At least in my opinion, most of these conversations really boil down to respect me and I'll respect you. And that's essentially what this is asking for. This idea shifts the concept of freedom from individualism to collective responsibility. The general will serves as the conscience of society, reminding us that there are times when we must set aside personal preferences to uphold the greater good. This doesn't mean imposing our moral judgments or personal beliefs onto others. Instead, it's about finding a balance where our collective freedom is shaped by mutual respect and a shared understanding of our rights. When we engage in civic duties like voting or participating in public discourse, we're not merely voicing individual opinions. We're contributing to a process that defines the general will. This collective responsibility is vital for the well-being of our community, and true freedom is realized when we actively participate in shaping the shared future together. Rousseau challenges us to think beyond our own desires and consider the broader impact of our choices, understanding that the general will is a living, breathing force that makes society work. Embracing this concept doesn't just make us responsible citizens, it makes us truly free. The general will should always aim at the common good, but the judgment guiding it isn't always wise or just. In other words, those in power don't always act in society's best interests. Sometimes they're driven by personal gain, willing to let the world burn if it means they can line their pockets or bask in the spotlight, even if that light is from the very fires they've ignited. Some people are just closed-minded assholes. As Rousseau warned, the general will is always right, but the judgment which guides it is not always enlightened. It does not follow that the deliberations of the people are always equally correct. We've all seen what happens when people in power impose their narrow vision of the world, ignoring the fundamental rights of others. They can abuse their authority to strip away civil liberties, deciding who deserves rights based on their own limited views. We see it in the fight for a woman's right to choose, in the struggle for trans rights, and even in the absurd battles over book bans and pronouns, of all things. These leaders, standing on their soapbox of so-called morality, claim to be enlightened. Yet it's this closed-mindedness that is pushing people apart. You see, voting isn't just about ticking a box. It's one of the most powerful ways we shape the society we want to live in, and even more so in a representative democracy. By voting, we express the general will and choose leaders who can, and oftentimes do, impact every corner of our lives. But when nearly 80 million eligible voters skipped the 2020 presidential election, they didn't just make a personal decision. They let others who might not have the community's best interests at heart steer the course of our society. And this isn't just about who's in the White House. Disengagement is not neutral. It's a choice that shapes our world, sometimes in ways that do more harm than good. The consequences of this disengagement are beyond alarming and far-reaching. In recent years, nearly 20 states have imposed severe restrictions or outright bans on abortion, stripping millions of women of their fundamental healthcare rights. These draconian measures come at a time when nearly 70% of Americans believe that Roe v. Wade should have been upheld, a clear indication of how disengagement can lead to a disconnect between public opinion and political action. As more clinics shut down due to these restrictive laws, women not only lose access to safe abortions but also to critical reproductive health care services like sexual education, prevention, and IVF. The gap between the general will and the actions of a minority in power has never been wider, and it's creating a crisis that impacts millions of women across the country. The erosion of rights doesn't stop there. Over 500 anti-LGBTQ+ bills were introduced across the country since 2023, a direct assault on the rights and dignity of transgender individuals and the LGBTQ+ community at large. These bills range from banning gender-affirming care for minors to restricting the use of correct pronouns in school. States like Texas have even investigated parents of trans children for child abuse simply for providing gender-affirming care. Despite growing public acceptance, the legislative landscape has become increasingly hostile, pushing vulnerable communities further to the margins. This isn't just about policy, it's about erasing the existence of LGBTQ+ people from public life, a move that should scare us all. Once seen as a protector of fundamental rights, the court has become a tool for rolling back decades of progress. The decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, undoing nearly 50 years of established precedent, is just the beginning. Citizens United v. FEC opened the floodgates for unlimited corporate spending in elections, embedding money even deeper into our government. The court's ruling in West Virginia v. EPA crippled the federal government's ability to combat climate change just when we need it most. And let's not forget the ominous signals regarding same-sex marriage, with justices questioning the legitimacy of Obergefell v. Hodges as the court continues to act against precedent. It becomes clear that our liberties are not as secure as we once thought. This power grab by a small, unenlightened group shows exactly what happens when we disengage, when we fail to express the general will. I get it. The system feels broken. Disengaging doesn't stop the pain. It perpetuates it. And on the lesser of two evils argument, honestly, it's one of the most frustrating things to hear. It's like, I get it, neither choice is perfect, but that mindset is fundamentally flawed. It doesn't just fail to drive real change, it actively sabotages it. Instead of pushing us to work for a better future, it turns the conversation into this negative, defeatist spiral. It's an excuse for people to disengage, to say, I really don't care, because it makes them feel like their choices don't matter. And that's the real issue. When we reduce our decision to picking between two evils, we're not just critiquing the system, we're giving up on it. This argument doesn't help us make progress, it only fuels apathy. And in a time when every vote, every voice should be pushing for something better, that's the last thing we can afford. By opting out, you're not actually giving a fuck you to the system. You're making it easier for that system to fuck over the values you claim to care about. Non-engagement isn't just sitting on the sidelines, it's actively working against the principles you stand for. Right now, there's a palpable sense of hope with Harrison Walz breathing new life into the Democratic Party. This renewed energy is exciting, but hope can easily turn into complacency if we're not careful. We've been burned before. Democrats might be playing the game smarter this time, but that doesn't mean we can sit back and relax. Our freedom, our very way of life, is tied to our willingness to engage in the messy, frustrating process of collective decision-making. Rousseau's philosophy, though centuries old, is strikingly relevant today. The real work lies in our commitment to democracy, in actively participating and refusing to sit back. We have the power to build a society that reflects our shared values, but only if we engage fully and completely, not just with likes and retweets, but with real, tangible action. We shape the world we live in. Let's make sure it's a world that reflects the best of what we can be.